So I'm going to be sharing my screen. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with this Bhagavad Gita verse 4:13. Chaturvanya mayashristam gunakarma abhivagasaha. Tasya kartam apimam vidyakartam avyayam. According to the three modes of material nature and the work associated with them, the four divisions of human society are created by me. And although I am the creator of the system, you should know that I am yet the non-doer, being unchangeable. So we might ask, among all of the hundreds of thousands of possible careers, why did Krishna categorize them into four? And why these four? What's the logic behind it? What's the rationale? Why did he do that? And we're going to be examining one of the primary reasons for these different career designations given by the Lord today that will really help us understand what should I be doing in my life for my career and what should I not be doing. Rukmini and I decided that we didn't want to use the traditional Sanskrit names for these careers because people already have some things associated with them, some of which may be negative. So we decided to come up with our own terms, and these terms are ones that we are understanding in a particular way for the purpose of this investigation. So we'd like you to whatever association you have with these English terms also, if you can somewhat set aside and see how that we're using them here. So basically, in every human society, no matter how simple, there are these fields of work. And we find that some people are producing food and other necessities from natural resources. Some people are keeping the system functioning. Zoom is acting up. Some people are keeping the system functioning and attractive. Some people are educating, and some people are governing society. And I don't know how to get this thing off of mine. Hopefully that worked. All right. So the people who are keeping the system functioning are called the field of artistry. Those who are producing food and necessities from natural resources, we're calling in the field of resources. Those who are governing, we're saying are in the field of government. That includes NGOs, even landlords on a very small scale, and those who are guiding and educating, we're calling in the field of ideas. So those are the terms that we're going to be using. And these four fields are useful because even though the availability of different careers changes over
Haribol, I think that you muted yourself.
Thank you. The main reason we're going to be looking at these four fields today is that the nature and the dharma of each of them is somewhat different and not compatible. So what's right and true in one field is harmful in another. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. And that may not be true if we just look at individual careers. But when we're going to be looking at these four fields or demarcations that Krishna is giving us in the scripture, we will see that they each have quite a different nature. So we're going to be focusing on what Rukmini and I call why fence off fields. Why in these four demarcations of career, we should do what we are meant to be doing, what's natural for us, what's the greatest expression of our personality and our nature, and not do something that's somebody else's nature. Now, Krishna talks about this concept in the Bhagavad Gita twice in two very similar verses. We'll look at each of them in turn. So in Bhagavad Gita 3:35, he says, Shreyan swadharma viguna para dharmat swanustitat swadharme nidhanan shreya para dharmo bhavayaha. Don't jump into someone else's path, even if it seems so much easier and better than yours. It's better to endure the difficulties of your own path, because to walk a path meant for another is very dangerous. And Krishna says practically the identical thing. The first two lines are identical in 1847. And whenever a teacher repeats themselves, and whatever they put at the end is going to be especially significant. So again, the first two lines are identical. Shreyan swadharma viguna, paradharmat swanustitat, swabhava niyatam karma, kurvan napnoti kilbisham. It is better, I lost the I on that. It is better to engage in one's own occupation, even though one may perform it imperfectly, than to accept another's occupation and perform it perfectly. Doing duty set by one's own nature, one incurs no offense. So we don't want to jump into someone else's path. Better the difficulties incurred in our own path. Why is that? Let's look in general, and we could say in general that when we work well in someone else's field, it's like adopting a persona. We become something like an actor who has to pretend to be what they're not. But even a talented actor would find it an unbearable strain to stay in character constantly. So if we're always trying to be something that we're not, we're going to feel strained. Eventually, Krishna says our true nature will come out. And I'm sure we can all think of situations where we really felt inauthentic. We felt that we were being someone we're not. We may notice in the verse in the 3rd chapter, Krishna says, another's path is bhayavaha, which literally means a vehicle made out of fear. So, really meditating, why should I use this particular metaphor? When we're doing work that's our own nature, that we love, then we love the work itself, and we tend to be much more tolerant of the circumstances. When we're doing someone else's work, because we don't love the work, then things like how much we get paid, how much office space we have, what kind of supervision is there, affect us a lot more. We'll find when we're doing someone else's work that we tend to be much more irritated and complain about these sort of external things. And in other words, the work that we're doing becomes a source of anxiety for us. So now we're going to look at all possible crossings of fields. So we have, remember, those 4 fields. We have artistry. These are the people who keep everything going in society. They keep everything functioning and beautiful. We have the field of resources. These are the people that create wealth from natural resources. They're the only people who generate wealth in society. We have the field of government. They're the people who take care of everyone, like the big parents, whether as landlords and NGOs or as literal governments of cities, towns, countries. Then we have the field of ideas, who provide the guidance and wisdom. Someone asked a question, how do we know what field we're in? That's another part of the book, but I think that this particular discussion should help you with that as well. So we're going to look again now at every possible way that we can take those 4 fields, and I have a nature to be in one of those fields, but I act in a different one. So first we're going to look at the crossing of government and resources. If somebody who should be in government works in resources, if someone who should be in resources works in government. Now, government redistributes their people's own wealth, but resources creates new wealth, or turns natural resources into usable wealth. And this essential difference means that resource people think those in government are foolishly generous, and people in government, when we say people in government, we mean people there by nature. People who have the nature of government think people in resources are too profit-minded. Now let's see when people who belong in resources, who have the nature of resources, instead work in government. So people who have the nature of resources, they tend to focus on the special interests of their particular industry. That's what they're supposed to do. They rightly strive to increase the flow of specific resources. They need laser-like focus on the special interests of those enterprises. But government is supposed to work in the long-term public interest. It can't get rid of problems by shifting responsibility to another entity or by excluding specific people from its domain. So when somebody with the nature of resources works in the field of government, they tend to focus on their interests as well. They have a really hard time being broad and thinking about the society as a whole. They're trying.
Krishna Mataji, sorry to interrupt. I think we are seeing both the next slide also in your presentation. I think we might need
Okay,
to.
you're not supposed to do that.
It's good.
Is it good now?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know what I did, and I'll have to repeat it at another time. I don't know what I did, but now it's working the way it's supposed to work. Okay, thank you, Krishna. Okay, and now you're still just seeing the one slide.
Yes, Mataji.
Excellent. Okay, again, we're looking at resources in government. So these people may end up making decisions with a view to helping their own industry, because they may think, well, when I get out of government, I can re-enter my industry. So while I'm in government, let me do things that support that industry. Then when I'm ready to go back into it, it will be at an advantage. They might want to go back to their industry in a new role of special pleading. They have certain connections with the know-how they've gotten in government. And this is called like the revolving door in government. And what this means is that the main interests of government, which are fairness and justice for all, can end up being overlooked. And because people are just into their special interests. And one example we have of this is private prisons. So the role of government in prisons, the interest of government in prisons, is to rehabilitate the criminals and bring them back into society as far as possible. It's a big expense for the government in many areas. But if somebody who has the mentality of resources is running a prison and running it as a private business, they want to keep the prisoners in there as long as possible because they're getting paid for each of the prisoners. So their view becomes not about rehabilitation. And this is a very good example of what happens when someone who has a mentality of resources, which is about making a profit and making their particular industry successful, goes into something that's designed to be in government. Now, what happens when someone who has a mentality of government works in the field of resources? Now, people in the field of government tend to prioritize the care of people. That's more important than projects or profits. And you might think, well, that's really good. We should put people over profits. And when you're in government, that is good. Just like when you're in resources, channeling things to your industry is what you're supposed to be doing. But when somebody with the mood of government ends up working in resources, then they're not going to be so concerned about making a profit and having their project thrive. Their project then will often fall apart. And then the people that they're serving as their employees and as their customers will lose the business. This is actually quite common. Sometimes we see people with a government mood who take up a business and they do the business for social justice or something like that. And the business usually fails or it gets bought over by a person with a mentality in resources. Again, if people who have a mentality for government go into resources, so people in government have a real interest in honor, fairness, and justice. So much so that they're willing to give their lives for the sake of honor, fairness, and justice. But in resources, if you're going to be successful in resources, you have to be constantly expanding profit for your own company or your own business, not just for society in general. You can't think about fairness and justice for all your competitors, right? And so they're looking for their own prosperity of their enterprise. And when you have a mood of government, you're likely to have your enterprise fail, right? For example, somebody with a mood of government might define a fair price for the customer as something that would lead to the failure of the business, because they're putting the happiness of the people in the above whether or not the business is going to be successful. All right, so we've looked at this interplay of government and resources, and I think you've already seen how what's wonderful for a resource person in resources becomes a problem when a resource person works in government. And what's wonderful for a government person in government becomes a problem when a government person works in resources. Let's now look at the interaction between government and ideas. And we're going to find the same basic thing happening here. That what's beautiful in one field becomes a problem in another. Now, there's some similarity between government and ideas. And again, we're talking about people, the mentality. People with a mentality for government or ideas, they're both concerned with long-range vision, and they're both concerned with whole systems. But in the field of ideas, their focus may seem impractical to those in the field of government. And the concerns of those in the field of government may seem too harsh or too hastily arrived at for those who are naturally in the field of ideas. So what happens when somebody suited for the field of ideas works in the field of government? Well, in the field of government, as we mentioned, justice, fairness, and law are dominant, and they're supposed to be dominant. In the field of ideas, forgiveness, equanimity, tolerance, and detachment are dominant. So if you're naturally in ideas and you go into the field of government, you may appear to be soft on domestic crime, you may appear to be soft on enemy nations, and we see this whenever somebody suited for the field of ideas has a government position. They tend to be so forgiving and so detached that criminals don't get punished, right? Enemy nations don't get dealt with. It's just like, oh, it's all right, which is great in the field of ideas and a problem in the field of government. Again, when people naturally suited for the field of ideas work in the field of government. You know, people in the field of ideas are naturally detached from concepts of fame and honor. I'm thinking about like Albert Einstein once had a meeting with some European king, and he was supposed to travel by train, and instead of going in the first class car, he went in the third class car. And so when he got off the train, there was no one to meet him because they were waiting for him at the first class car. He just didn't have any concept like this of an interest in fame and honor. But concepts of fame and honor are essential in government because you have to infuse your citizens with some patriotic feeling in order to engender loyalty and service for the country. And someone who's naturally in the field of ideas might find it very, very difficult to get the kind of esprit de corps and patriotism that they need to do among their citizens. Again, looking at when people suited for the field of ideas work in the field of government. In government, you have to make decisions quickly and with whatever information you have at hand. But in the field of ideas, you naturally want to do detailed study and have a long time for research. And often people in the field of ideas in government, they'll wait too long to make a decision. and the opportune moment passes, or at least they're going to feel really under pressure and stressed with having to make decisions without the full information. Suppose people who are naturally suited for the field of government work instead in the field of ideas. This can result in the politicization of a specific field of knowledge. In other words, they can bend knowledge for political purposes. So they're supposed to have political purposes in the field of government, that's their job. But if they're looking at ideologies, they may use those ideologies for political purposes. Also, their motive for fame, their motive for community, which is essential when working in government, when you bring that to the field of ideas, then they may be more interested in having righteous fame than in propagating truth. So they might put forward a particular theory or particular research just to get their name in some magazine or whatever, or to get a prize, rather than to propagate truth. Government people, people designed by nature for government working in ideas, may also tend to impose a more hierarchical structure upon that field of ideas, because people in the field of government feel comfortable with a more hierarchical structure. You know, here's the president and here's the ministers. But in the field of ideas, things are very fluid. Who's in charge of what is constantly changing. And when you naturally in the field of government and you bring this more hierarchical move to the field of ideas, it acts like a big dam that just blocks the flow of knowledge and wisdom in society. When people suited for the field of government work in the field of ideas, they may find it very difficult to be energized by vairagya, by renunciation, equanimity. They may long for their more natural prosperity of yasha, or community and fame and dharma. And because they're looking for their natural food, which is yasha, or fame and righteous dharma, righteous honor. So they may be swayed by acclaim and community biases that take them away from truth. Okay, now we're going to look at a mixture of ideas and resources. Ideas and resources. So to people naturally suited for the field of ideas, work in resources may seem very self-centered and materialistic. Like, why are you interested in profit? Why are you interested in making money? And resource people ideally have a very practical system of ethics. So for people in the field of resources, work in the field of ideas may be like, that's all theoretical, that's all useless. People in the field of resources may think it's unethical to spend money to pay for research, study, and teaching about topics for which there's no practical benefit of wealth in the society. So the people in the field of ideas think those in resources are materialistic, and the people in the field of resources think that the people in the field of ideas waste money and waste energy on things that aren't profitable and aren't generating a tangible wealth for the society. So what happens when people suited for the field of ideas work in the field of resources? Well, people suited for the field of ideas, they focus foremost on truth. They have a neutral, detached perspective. But the very nature of work in the field of resources is not to be neutral or objective. They're supposed to focus on the flow and increase resources for the profit of their enterprise and family. And when somebody is working in resources, but they're in the field of ideas, they start thinking, wow, I've become selfish. I've lost my detachment. They start to feel a kind of disgust with themselves. When people in the field of people suited for the field of ideas work in the field of resources, they have a concept of fairness and transparency where they may just give things away. You know, they don't want to sell things. They want to give things away. I was just speaking yesterday to one of my former Gurukul students who said that she's written some Krishna conscious dramas and she just can't decide if she should give them away or put them into a book that she sells. She said, I just don't feel right asking for money for a book. So this is a very natural mood of people in the field of ideas. They just want to give things away, or they feel conflicted by profit-minded work. They just abandon it. And so they end up just not being able to run a business properly. It fails. They might like to have their own garden. Someone who's naturally in the field of ideas might love to have some raised beds in their backyard and grow flowers and vegetables for their family. But if it becomes an agribusiness, then they don't even have any interest in it anymore. I have a good friend who was doing a lot of programming just as like a hobby for free. And his wife said to him, why don't you do this for pay? And he said, if people paid me, I wouldn't want to do it anymore. And people who are naturally suited for the field of ideas, they don't understand or enjoy this relentless thirst for bigger and better and bigger and better, which you need in the field of resources in order to be successful. In fact, the Srimad Bhagavatam characterizes those in the field of resources as having this expansive thirst, because people in resources aren't supposed to just feed their family, they're supposed to feed the world. And in order to feed the world, you always have to be thinking of expansion. So when people naturally suited for the field of ideas go into the field of resources, they can't take care of people properly. What happens when people who are naturally suited for the field of resources go into the field of ideas? Well, then you have an increased likelihood of corruption in the field of ideas. Think about when pharmaceutical companies fund medical research. So they're not going to have an unbiased search for truth. If they're naturally suited for the field of resources, they're going to want money channeled into their resources. The concept of having this neutral and unbiased search for truth, again, it doesn't make any sense to them. Research is supposed to be about making a profit. And if they can keep to the principles of the field of ideas, then they might be unmotivated. If they can keep the ethics, either they're going to be corrupted, or if they keep the ethics, they're like, why should I work for all this theoretical ideas? What use is it? What practical value is it? There's no money in it. There's no leadership opportunity. And in the field of ideas, people naturally share credit, or they just give up personal credit at all. And the person in the field of resources is like, well, why should I even do it? If I'm not going to, just see, it's the opposite. The person in the field of ideas says, if I'm getting paid for it, I don't want to do it anymore. The person suited for the field of resources says, if I'm not getting paid for it, I don't want to do it anymore. So they're motivated in different ways. When a person in the field of resources works in the field of ideas, they're likely to think that the concepts in the field they're working in are just impractical pie in the sky. And they're just like, why should I even care? They may become very negligent in their work because they just can't see the value or importance of it. And we're going to have time for questions, so don't worry. Let's look at crossing ideas and artistry. So there's a big similarity between the fields of ideas and the field of artistry. And that's that both people suited for either of these fields tend to feel internally satisfied. In the fields of government and resources, people always want to do bigger, more. But in artistry and ideas, people are satisfied. But they're satisfied very differently. So those in the fields of artistry, those suited for the fields of artistry, they tend to be satisfied if they have basic creature comforts. If I have a nice, comfortable house and furniture and food to eat and people who love me and I like my job, then I'm happy. And people in the field of ideas tend to be self-satisfied because they're self-satisfied within. Now, one thing we should mention is that there are people who are involved in the fine arts, not commercial arts, but fine arts, who are in the field of ideas. So there are people who communicate wisdom and truth through dance, through song, through painting, through drama, and so forth. I mean, if some of you are familiar, say, with Bob Dylan, so he wasn't making music to create beauty in society. He was creating music to try to communicate truth. Now, of course, he didn't really act like someone in the field of ideas, but this concept that if I'm making music to communicate truth, if I'm painting to communicate truth, if I'm dancing to communicate truth, if that's my primary motivation, I'm also wanted to be beautiful, but my primary motivation is the communication of truth, then I'm in the field of ideas. If I'm creating works of art and my primary motivation is the communication of beauty, the expression of emotion, the expression of rasa, then I'm in the field of artistry. So that's just something to keep in mind in understanding who's in what field. All right, let's say people naturally suited for the field of artistry work in the field of ideas. So people who are suited for the field of artistry, they're concerned with the beauty and function of society in terms of tangible, tactile work. But the field of ideas is a field of abstractions. So when people naturally suited for artistry work in ideas, they can miss subtleties, they can miss context in knowledge and information. So they often present facts, quotes, and truth out of context, in isolation, with the aim of preserving or creating functionality in a limited sphere. Now, we see this operating today all over, that people suited for the field of artistry start dabbling in the field of ideas and present things maybe on the internet where, they're quoting out of context, they're missing the subtleties, they're missing the nuances, they're quoting just to promote a particular practical idea, and it just makes a mess of the field of ideas. Something that's, again, beautiful in their own field, once they go into ideas, it's a catastrophe. Now, the main thing that people in the field of artistry bring to society is the experience of rasa. Rasa means taste. So it literally means taste, like in food, like sweet, salty, sour, bitter, pungent, astringent. But it also means everything we find enjoyable in life. The parental relationship, romantic relationship, friendship, service, wonder, comedy, tragedy, all the things that bring enjoyment of life. That is the realm of people in the field of artistry. They're the ones who supply that. But when people in the field of artistry bring that concept of enjoyment into religion, spirituality, and education, they're going into a field where they're supposed to be detached wisdom. So let's say you have a lot of salt and spices to put in your food, which is the realm of taste and rasa, and instead you put it in your eyes, which is the function of those in the field of ideas, to be the vision for society. You start putting salt and spices in your eyes, you're going to start crying, you're not going to be able to see properly, you're not going to be able to guide properly. So when people suited for the field of artistry go to the field of ideas, they end up sensualizing that field and destroying the detached wisdom that is supposed to reign there. And here again, we find a similar just lack of understanding. I mean, someone naturally in the field of artistry might like to play in the field of ideas as a hobby, but serious work in the field of ideas is going to seem to them like crossword puzzles. It doesn't have any value. If they're working in that field, it's hard for them to understand what is the value of that field. This happens with every crossing, that you don't get the main value of a field that's not your own. When people suited for the field of artistry work in the field of ideas, they may have an inner conflict between the detached guidance they need to give society and their natural desire to please and serve others. Somebody naturally suited to the field of artistry, they want to paint the painting that the customer wants. They want to do the plumbing the way the customer wants. They want to put in the woman I'm staying with just got a new floor in her kitchen, and the worker is showing us different flooring and what do you want? So people in the field of artistry they have this mood of service, and they love to please others and give others what they want. But when you're in the field of ideas, you have to communicate truth and wisdom, even if it's not going to be pleasing to people. So if somebody naturally in the field of artistry goes into the field of ideas, they may neglect doing the research to find the possible unpleasant truths that need to be communicated, or they may distort what information they find in order to please others. Again, people suited to the field of artistry going into the field of ideas. So as we remember, both in artistry and ideas, people tend to be very satisfied very easily. But in the field of artistry, what's satisfying is what we would call creature comforts. You know, I have a happy family, I have comfortable chairs to sit in, I don't need to make a lot of money, I know I don't need to do a lot of things. In the field of ideas, the sense of satisfaction comes from the activities of the mind or the intellect or maybe spirituality. Now, it's very hard to corrupt people naturally suited for the field of ideas because they're not interested in external things of the world. It just doesn't have any interest for them. Whereas people in the field of artistry, although they're not interested in grandiose things, they want simple physical pleasures. So when someone in the field of artistry works in the field of ideas, the combination that they want a comfortable life and that they want to please others means that they can be easily corrupted, and they kind of can create a fire of corruption in the field of ideas. Now, in the field of ideas, freedom is the key to developing ideas. And people in the field of ideas need literal and figurative space to allow for discussion and exploration that may seriously challenge the status quo. However, those in the field of artistry, they're providing the function of society. Their job is to keep the status quo. So it may be very difficult for someone whose nature is to keep the status quo to be in a field where their job is to challenge it. Let's see what happens when people suited for ideas work in the field of artistry. Now, it's interesting that although in the scriptures we are told that no one should cross between these four fields, this particular crossing from those who are suited for the field of ideas going in the field of artistry is considered to be the worst for people, individuals, and society. Rukmini and I spent quite a bit of time recently really going deeply into why this particular crossing could be so detrimental. So when you're in the field of artistry, there are constraints and deadlines of who to please. But this runs the risk of taking precedence over large-scale considerations of abstract thinking that's natural to somebody who should be in the field of ideas. And so a person suited for the field of ideas may be very conflicted, and they may become insubordinate, they may procrastinate, they may not meet deadlines. I remember I had a situation where we were trying to have a productive meeting of scholars, and we gave everyone 2 days to work on a particular assignment. And when we came back at the end of the 2 days, everybody presented what they had written and researched. And one of the scholars, so what did you do? And he said, I was thinking. So it's very natural for people in the field of ideas to want to have this time and space for abstract thinking. And if they work in the field of artistry where they have to have things done in a certain way at a certain deadline, then they may appear to become insubordinate. In fact, the leader of this group at the time consider the behavior of this person to be very insubordinate. Now, this is a very interesting idea. In both the field of ideas and the field of artistry, the highest value is integrity. Now, integrity is important in all fields, but we all know that people in government cannot always exercise integrity in the strictest sense of the word because they can't reveal state secrets. They have to use diplomacy. And we know that in the field of resources, you might not be honest in the strictest term in order to make a profit. But in ideas, you have to have full honesty about truth. And in artistry, you have to have a full sense of integrity in terms of doing what's going to please others and getting it done on time so that it will provide function. Because people in the field of artistry are what make the whole society function. So if you're in the field, if you're suited for the field of ideas, but you're working in the field of artistry, you're going to have this kind of inner dissonance. You want to be a person of high integrity, but how integrity is defined in the field of artistry is so different, you know, that you're not going to be able to do it. You need the time and space to get your work done. I produce a lot of books with artists, and most artists are in the field of artistry. I'll say, you know, this is the picture I want done. I want it done like this, and they do it to please me. But I had, and they get it done generally on time. I had a situation where I was working with an artist who was in the field of ideas. And she never showed me a sketch. She never got my approval for things. She did the art the way she wanted to do them. She got everything done like literally 2 years later than I had asked her to get them done. And, you know, she wasn't able to have the integrity of the field of artistry, which is to do things, you know, the way I wanted them at the time that I wanted them. Instead, she had the integrity of the field of ideas, where her artwork beautifully expressed truth and wisdom in her own way, just substantial. But, you know, if you're relying on people in the field of artistry to get their stuff done the way it's needed to be done and on time, people in the field of ideas who work in the field of artistry, they're going to make a mess out of it. Also, people in the field of ideas, they care about detachment and equilibrium. They don't really care about, you know, worldly pleasures, which is the whole thing that people in the field of artistry are supposed to be supplying to society. So, you know, often people in the field of ideas, they may not recognize the deep need of society or even themselves for healthy, nourishing, and spiritually uplifting pleasures on the physical platform. So if they're working in the field of artistry, they don't really care, you know, if I do things that are beautiful and uplifting. You know, first of all, they may not get things to work on time. And second of all, they may destroy the rasa that the field of artistry is meant to give. They're going to bring this detachment and this equanimity and this disinterest in the world to the field that provides the function for the world. And in that way, they pollute the whole field and nobody gets any pleasure in life anymore. When people who should be in the field of ideas work in the field of artistry, instead of going that route and bringing their detachment to the field of artistry where it doesn't belong, they may bring the pleasure of the field of artistry into themselves. And here we have what I believe is the main reason why people suited to the field of ideas should never work in the field of artistry, why it is the most dangerous crossover. Because the pleasures of the world are the natural food for those in the field of artistry, and it's what they're giving to society, which is needed for everyone's health and balance. But for those suited to the field of ideas, this kind of pleasure is just like poison. And so if someone in the field of ideas starts imbibing the rasa of the field of artistry, for them, it becomes a polluting sort of sensuality. You know, like we were talking about getting salt in your eyes. Well, here people in the field of ideas, they really pollute this field of artistry if they themselves imbibe the mood of the field of artistry to some extent. So if they don't at all imbibe the mood of the field of artistry, they ruin the field by not having any rasa in it. And if they do start to imbibe the mood of the field of artistry, they start using their ability for analysis and research and truth and wisdom to promote a gross and debased form of sensuality in society. So you can think about psychiatrists, psychologists who use advertisements in a way to bring out people's basest desires, or food scientists who engineer chemical and unhealthy food to approximate the taste and texture of healthy food. So they start to use their wisdom and their intellectual abilities in order to produce this really gross sensuality in society, which pollutes them and destroys the society. So again, ideals people in artistry, it can feel very awkward to them to be dependent on patrons, to be dependent on customers and employers. They really want autonomy, and they end up feeling very conflicted within. Okay, going to the relationship between artistry and government. So people in government want to expand. Those in artistry are more satisfied. Those in government and artistry are both externally focused, but in government, it's on taking care of a lot of people, and in artistry, it's in taking care of their craft. So when artistry people go into government, they have difficulty embracing uncertainty in the what and how of their work than those naturally suited for government. The ability to function in what's called the fog of war, the thrill of functioning in the uncertainty of the fog of war, it's natural to those suited for government. It's really uncomfortable for those suited to artistry. And the comfort with clear objectives for both the result and the processes that is natural for those in artistry often results in their imposing bureaucratic processes into government workings where it doesn't belong. When those suited for artistry go into government, to them, and here we find this repeated theme, that people in the wrong field just can't relate to the ethics of that field. So people suited for artistry who work in government, they might think that all of this interplay and negotiation and deal making of government is just politics. You know, they just want to exercise their own skills. They're going to hate the kind of work that they have to do. And not only just the fog of war, but any kind of shrewd decision making, it doesn't come natural to those in the field of artistry. Now, those in the field of artistry can do the bureaucratic work that governments need to have done as assistants, but when working in the field itself, they make it just a system of set rules and procedures that can't respond holistically to what's going on. When people suited for artistry work in the field of government, we find a contradiction that those suited for the field of government like to rush into danger. They're the ones who rush into battle. They're the ones who rush into the burning buildings to save others. They sacrifice their own comfort. They have their own inner resolve and detachment from their own safety. Whereas those naturally suited for the field of artistry, they want a simple, comfortable life where they're expert at their skills. This tendency with wanting to be comfortable can make them prone to corruption in the field of government. They can get enamored by the perks of a job in government, the adulation, the respect, the access to various government resources and side benefits. And instead of being willing to take on danger, they can start amassing these things for their own comfort. Now here, you'll notice it's the same picture we had for people of ideas in the field of artistry as for people in the field of government in the field of artistry. We have a similar problem here, that people in the government, people naturally suited for the field of government, I can't work very well with constraints of deadlines and who to please. And they really don't want those sort of constraints taking precedence over large-scale considerations of fairness, justice, public interest, and so forth. And the inner conflict may result in, again, insubordination, procrastination, failure to meet deadlines. And again, we're using the same pictures we used in ideas. And people in the field of government put a high value on autonomy. They don't like the idea of being in the field of artistry where they have to please certain customers. It feels very unnatural to them. All right, looking at the cross between resources and artistry. So both resources and artistry deal with the practical needs of society, but those in artistry tend to focus on the craft, the quality of their craft, and the satisfaction of a job well done. Those naturally in resources tend to focus on profit, expansion, and quantity. So when people naturally suited for resources go into the field of artistry, their drive for the expansion of profits and goods, they're going to emphasize quantity over quality. And then a lot of the quality that's necessary in the field of artistry will become lost to automation and mechanization. So we end up with fast foods, fast clothing, clothing that becomes fashionable or falls apart by the next season, plastic that replaces metal and glass, entertainment that has just superficial violence and sex just to get you to buy it instead of inspiring reflection through plots and character development, drug-fueled sports. So these are all the things that happen when people naturally suited for the field of resources go into the field of artistry. When people naturally suited for the field of artistry go into the field of resources, they get frustrated when their supervisors keep relentlessly driving them to find new ways of expanding the business. They're happy to bake bread at home and sell it at the flea market. They don't want to create a chain of bread stores all over the world. They're happy with a simple life, so they end up feeling very frustrated. And this wonderful tendency of people in the field suited for the field of artistry to be satisfied with the simplest, most direct and immediate way of fulfilling their needs, when they go into the field of resources, they're not capable of the long-term thinking and big picture view that's required in resources, where you have to think about ecology, sustainability, and renewal that have to be prioritized at the expense of immediacy. So people naturally suited for the field of artistry, they prioritize immediacy. People naturally suited for the field of resources, they prioritize sustainability and renewal. And when someone naturally suited for the field of artistry goes into the field of resources, we're going to have depletion of resources, we're going to have pollution of natural resources, which are going to give poor outcomes for humanity and for the planet. So in summary, we can see that each of these four fields, artistry, resources, government, and ideas, they each have their own glory. They each have their own beauty. They each have their own ideals that in their own field are wonderful, but in another category become disqualifications. And when we look at what happens when people cross the fences between the fields, we can start to understand a little bit of why Krishna takes all the hundreds of thousands of careers, designates them in these four ways, and says, do the work that's suited to your own nature. Better to be destroyed doing your own work than to get in the vehicle of fear that's in someone else's work, even if you think you can do it perfectly. So thank you for your patience with the screen sharing. Again, I don't know why we had that problem. And we have a little bit of time here for questions. All right, let's see.
Mataji, thank you so much. There was the first question from Karthik Prabhu. how to identify our own nature correctly.
That is another seminar.
Okay.
We have, in our book, we have several chapters that are geared to answering that particular question. So we thought to focus in this class on the wisdom of Krishna in designating careers in these four fields rather than in some other way. I'm sure you could gain something from hearing this, of understanding something of your own nature. But again, that would be another class. You know, eventually, I mean, I did recently teach a series of 6 classes from this book at the Shivananda Ashram in the Bahamas, and those videos are available from them. So you can see some videos there on that point. And we had a question here from Prem Sindhu Prabhu. People in government mode may not agree with those in ideas and vice versa, and so on with every other combination. How can they all cooperate together without conflict? That's also another part of the book. We have a whole chapter about how the people in the 4 different fields cooperate with each other, how competition should be reserved for within the field. So, like, there can be debates within the field of ideas in order to come up with the highest truth. There's a literal war between governments, or competition between types of governments. There's competition between businesses. In the field of artistry, we find athletic competitions, Olympic competitions, art competitions, plumbing competitions. But the fields cooperate with each other. They see their role in the universal body. Just like our brain cells are not generally, unless we're under some sort of stress, competing with our heart or our muscle cells. They each have their own role to play. So in an ideal society, people in each field respect the values of people in the other field and know how to cooperate. But the details, again, is for another class. Okay, what are the ethics of collaboration between the field? The basic ethics of collaboration between the field is respect. And knowing that my food is your poison and your food is my poison. That I cannot and should not impose the ethics of my field and the norms of my field on another field. When we do that, there's havoc. Each field has its dharma, each field has its ethics, each field has its integrity, but it looks very different. You know, the dharma of running into a fire is for the field of government. But in the field of resources, your dharma is you better put your oxygen mask on first. Because if you're not taking care of your needs, your whole business is going to fail and you won't be able to feed and clothe society. So the collaboration is knowing that everybody has their own dharma, and that is respected. Over quickly prejudging people's field evaluation, because we can't tell the difference between collaboration and pathing errors. I'm not really sure what that means. When does the book come out? You'll have to ask the Supreme Lord, but the book is written. It's actually been written for a while. We're in our 3rd editing run through at this point. So hopeful. I mean, I'm hoping by the end of the year that it will come out. Rukmini and I are working on it a lot. We're working at least 3 days a week, yeah? 3 to 5 days a week, sometimes 6 or 7 days a week. Are you born with a tendency to one nature? Can one change nature over time? Krishna seems to indicate in the Bhagavad Gita quite strongly that we're born with a nature and we cannot repress it. He says, what will repress and accomplish? Having said that, our nature is very much affected by our nurture, and to totally separate nature and nurture is not possible. So to what extent our nature comes out positively and that we even understand it has a lot to do with our upbringing. Research work in academia is ideas or artistry. I think it is ideas, but also has deadlines and deliverables. Can you clarify this? Well, you know, many times in the fields in modern society are not run by the ethics of those fields. So understanding about the fields of work is not just understanding individual nature. We have two parts of our book is about individual nature, but we also have a part about society as a whole and how society as a whole can function. I imagine that a lot of people reading the book won't be as interested in that, but we do have a society-wide view that it's going to be difficult for people to work in their own individual fields according to their dharma if society as a whole isn't run properly. We also deal with this point in our second part in what's called cherishing your field of work, to make sure that the field that we're in as a whole is functioning by the dharma of that field. You know, that it's not just that I'm doing the dharma of my field, but my field as a whole is functioning by that dharma. And if it isn't, then even if I'm in the right place, according to my nature, there may be some discomfort. So if I'm working in a university, but the university's run as if it was a pottery shop, or if it was a government administration, or as if it was a for-profit business, then there's going to be some feeling of discomfort for me, even though I'm in the right field. Okay, I think we're kind to run out of time here. By the way, I noticed that Vrinda Sundari is on this call, and we really have to thank her for the fact that this book is coming together. She let Rukmini and I stay in her home for 3 weeks when we were first literally writing the chapters. And I wouldn't be making this presentation if it wasn't for her.
That wasn't an austerity.
Well, that's your kindness.
Treasured gifts.
So a question, in which way those in ideas when working in artistry have the tendency to work for themselves, do they become selfish? No one is selfish when they're working according to their nature for the glory of Krishna. It's like your heart cells can't be selfish if they're working as a heart cell for the benefit of your body. That's just not possible. So when we're doing what we're supposed to be doing for the benefit of the universal body or for the benefit of Krishna, selfishness is basically impossible. And if I go into someone else's field and I do my natural work, it may end up appearing to be selfish. You know, it may end up appearing to me and to others to be selfish. Okay, how do we understand fake it till make it? Or, well, I don't know if that's in the Shastra. Or develop skills by coming out of comfort zone as part of doing services in Krishna conscious, so it's not my nature. As far as I understand from Krishna, we're supposed to do things for Krishna that are our nature. I have yet to find in the Shastra or from our acharyas anything that says that surrender means acting out of your nature. I've never seen surrender defined that way except by some ISKCON leaders who need something done and don't have the right person to do it. But as far as the Shastra and Prabhupada and our acharyas, surrender is surrendering me. I can't surrender you. You know, if I surrender you, then it's human sacrifice, right? If I put you on the altar, that's demoniac. I can put me on the altar, but I can't put you on the altar. I can't donate your car to the temple. I don't have a car, but you know, I could only donate my car to the temple. Right? I mean, how can I donate your car to the temple? You know, it doesn't mean anything. Well, we really need a car. I don't have a car. Should I steal their car and give it to the temple? That's not surrender. So if it's not who I am, I'm not supposed to steal somebody else's thing and donate that. It's not. Krishna says, better be destroyed doing your own duty. Now, there are emergencies. So if it's really a bona fide emergency, anybody can do anything. And the willingness to do anything for a short amount of time in a genuine emergency is a kind of exhilarating sort of surrender. That's true even in ordinary life. but it's meant to be very rare. We should run into those emergencies a few times in our life only, and for a very brief period of time. Like if I see a kid running out in front of a car, I don't stop and say, is that my kid? You know, I'm just going to pull that kid out of the road, and I might even grab their arm so hard I'll leave a bruise on their arm because it's an emergency. I don't stop and say, you know, where are the parents if nobody else is around. But that doesn't mean I go around pulling kids by their arm all the time. You know, in an emergency, you can do anything. That's another thing. But we shouldn't be living, if we're living in a society where it's always an emergency, that's exhausting. Okay, when I came to Bhakti, I feel like changed natures, yet more it feels like my fake nature was being lifted. I was seeing my true nature. Is this something Bhakti helps with? Yes, definitely. Okay, and Parasuram acts as a Kshatriya in an emergency. Parasuram is God. He's a Shaktivesh avatar. If you're a Shaktivesh avatar, do whatever you like. And the story of Parasuram's appearance is also, you know, his grandmother got the payasa that she would have a Kshatriya type son, even in a Brahmana family. So it's not really very applicable. Some people say in Kali Yuga, we are a mix of 4 or a mix of 2. I'd love to see a praman for that. I just see that our Shastras say that we have a nature and our nature cannot be repressed. Now, there are people that are kind of on the edge. So there are people in the field of ideas who are almost in the field of government, and they may be acting as advisors in the field of government, people in the field of artistry who are almost in the field of resources. I mean, you do have people that are kind of on the cusp, but you will find that they're dominantly one or the other. Also, an interesting point is because people in the field of artistry may assist people in the other 3 fields. If someone is primarily in artistry, but also has some inclination in another field, then they may be an assistant in that other field, but still staying in the field of artistry. Can astrology define the field of a person? Yes. Can a particular astrologer do that? I don't know. So there's a difference between saying, can astrology do that, and can XYZ person astrologer do that? How do we understand that everyone is born a Shudra in Kali Yuga? We understand that by the fact that in former ages, there were systems by which people's nature was nurtured and called for even during pregnancy and so forth, and that's not being done today. So today there's much more of a need for people to be nurtured. That doesn't mean that people are not born with a particular nature. Another thing it means that everyone in Kali Yuga is a Shudra is that people who have an inclination for different fields are not being trained in Kali Yuga generally with dharmic expertise of that field. So even if it's a person with the nature of government working in the field of government, they may not be following the dharma of government. And that's a whole other topic. Is there a preference test we could recommend? I wish. Do people that are married need to be married to the same person in the same field? Ideally, in Vedic society, there was a lot of attention being given to the concept of a married couple both being in the same field. Now, when we understand for example, in the Shastra, many times it says that the wife should be servant of the husband. And people sometimes think that that means that women were just domestic servants, that women just cooked and cleaned and took care of babies and that kind of thing. But if the husband and wife had the same field, if they had the same career, then her service to the husband meant that they were assisting each other in their career. And in fact, Srila Prabhupada writes about this concept as the ideal of married life. He says, like the wife is spinning, the husband is weaving, together they make a cloth. Husband, wife, child are all taking the pottery out to be sold. So we see that in the Shastra, the women had career, but because their career was in harmony with that of their husband, that they could engage in their career and their household life in an extended family without some kind of conflict. The other reason it's nice to have married couples in the same field is the psychologies of the 4 different fields are quite different. Maybe our next step is putting out a preference test. It's a lot of work to get a valid and reliable test. A lot of work, a lot of investment, and so forth. That would be a nice idea. I don't know if that's something that Rukmini and I are going to do personally, but it certainly is something that's worth doing. Okay, so I think we should end here. And thank you very, very much. I understand that there's more going on in the program. So thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.